Okay, so enterprise manager. So this is essentially for monitoring how the system is performing. Not so much on the is our servers up and running, but this is the platform in terms of is it up and running with regards to ensuring that obviously the reports are being delivered, um, and then how long those reports are taking to generate, to execute, and then are your users actually getting them in the first place, those cubes that you've created to try and speed up the performance of the environment. So essentially think of it as the entire BI on your BI platform in as much as it's on the cloud environment. Uh, so let's just close the poll here. All right. So what you'll see is that Enterprise Manager, it is true, it's dedicated towards administrators, essentially to help them monitor how the environment is doing. And as I said, observing its performance, figuring out problems, but at the same time also giving them an insight as to how the performance is actually doing. Sorry, the environment is actually doing. So who's accessing what reports, how often, or which reports are accessed most often. Top 10, top 20 type kind of information or statistics. So essentially, you're saying that it helps us to build a project that helps us to report on the stats around our intelligence server that is running our MicroStrategy on AWS environment. So in terms of what those reports and the dashboards help us to do, so we can, as a result of all these reports on our intelligence server, therefore we can, in a sense, modify the allocation of the resources based on the usage that we see from those statistics. Help us get, you could say, efficient aggregation, partitioning, and indexing strategies in order to speed things up, because we get to see, okay, this type of reports are making so many joins before they get generated. So let's find out ways to essentially speed them up from a indexing, partitioning, as well as aggregation point of view. Figuring out the optimal time to run your scheduled reports, because you'll get to see as to the peak times that your certain reports are being accessed in terms of the activity within the system, and you can also figure out when to perform any maintenance from the database end of view, as well as the MicroStrategy platform itself, in terms of upgrades, patches, hot fixes, and the like. And then it also helps you to, because you're getting an insight on your entire intelligence server and the different objects that are there, then you get to see what objects are no longer being used because there's zero hits around them, and therefore to save space, to help the system perform better, we can get those objects deleted. Okay, and then we get a profile around the users as to how they actually using the system. So it could say it gives us insight on our prolific users, but also it could say user adoption. The reports that are being created, really being used, and if so, how often. Okay, so we'll show you how you access the. So notice that it says here it helps us to build a project that reports on your stats. So it is actually a project accessible in your environment, but it has to be installed separately. So if you log into your environment, it's probably logged you out, so you have to log back in. There you go. So just refreshing it. So essentially, this will be our first exercise in this chapter, accessing enterprise and manager. So there is a project. It looks very much like any other project that is attached to this intelligence server. Now, this is obviously in our case based on the setup, the fact that it's on the same box, and in this case, we've made it to run on the same intelligence server. if you were to look, as we'll see later on, in terms of the technicalities of it, the architecture of it, such as the database instance. Okay, so it uses a special database called Intelligence Manager, and if you notice, it's in this case, it's the only database that it's connecting to, and that acts as the primary database. Now, on the admin side, in terms of the the metadata objects, the application objects, they will be special in the sense that they are specific to the platform versus the attributes and metrics that you'll be reporting on in a business aspect. Your profits and revenue. This one is around the usage of your system. So if you look at the collection of attributes that you have here around daytime, delivery services, and of course deprecated objects, jobs, report jobs, and the different types of metrics that can be built, which essentially the dimensions that you can report on or will be reporting on out of the box. And then if you want to customize that, you can go ahead and do so based on some of this. So here we have so-called all indicators. Now, the good thing is you don't have to create these. They do come pre-built for us. And now if we want to modify, then we can go ahead and say, okay, I want this particular attribute because I want to be reporting on this one versus what's currently available for me. So drilling to object and the like. Okay, so that's your schema object. And then under is that okay? So the table that it uses will be quite different from the tables that your normal BI system will actually use. So if you notice these, as we'll see when you set up your own what do we call it, a statistics repository, and therefore creating an enterprise manager, you'll notice that the tables that you'll be accessing are configured using the MicroStrategy configuration wizard, and therefore it creates the kind of or it helps to hold the kind of data that will be generated by intelligence server. Okay, and then if we were to navigate to the public object and specific under reports, and then these are the reports that will be generated as a result. And most of these are built for us out of the box. Some best opened in web versus developer. For example, this compliancy dossier, some dashboards around activity analysis, errors, project analysis, and again, these are best opened in web. And then one of the exercises we'll be doing some user analysis, looking at some of the user activities. So activity by user, your top N users. In this case, you get to see who are your top 10, but you can change that in terms of the N is a variable, so you can change based on how many users you want to analyze at a time. Preference analysis, so user groups in which they belong to, popular reports within user groups. Now, in this case, most of these reports are prompted reports. So before you actually run them, you need to filter out or specify certain parameters. So in this case, we need to enter a value. Let's go ahead and use the 1. May not be sufficient. Okay, and then when do we want the time frame? So let's use all time frame. So this will, in terms of how much data we'll be able to bring. Let me remove this one. It depends on how long you've been running your environment. So if you notice in our case, it's just been a day. So as to how much telemetry data has been generated, probably not an awful lot. My environment has been around a little bit longer, so I might get some data around user groups and the like. So if I click next, which user do I want? Let's see. Let's take all of them, and then we'll figure out. Because I did create some users on the fly. Okay, then there's a summary of my selection, and let's go ahead and run it and see Okay, I have more elements than the maximum number. Oh yeah, they only wanted the maximum of one and minimum of one. So here, we can't do what I've just done here. So let's use train one. Oops. Train one. There you go. Okay. Just one. All right, let's go ahead and use this guy. So let's see what how many jobs have been running and the like. Okay, so looks like they've only been running one. Now this is you get to choose the group first. So here I think they'll be in. So everyone, remember, will encompass pretty much every user in your system. So in this project, Consolidated Education, they only ran one job. But if I change this to tutorial, they ran quite a number of jobs, 924. So think of all the reports, the execution documents, and then of course it's all times, not just last year or a given period of time. It's all times. And so you can get all these reports, which we'll cover in greater detail a little bit more. Okay, so essentially just to show you where to access it, as we said, it's built in with your project source, and it's just one of the projects, and it's where it says Enterprise Miner. It does look and feel like all the other projects that you create, only this time this is a system created or system built and populated project, but it allows us to report on our BI platform. Okay, so with that, a little bit more on the workflow. So as far as the workflow, in terms of how do those reports get created, generated. So essentially what happens is that as the users use your MicroStrategy project running reports against the intelligence server, statistics are being logged into a statistics repository, which statistics repository we have to create just like any other database. Only this time it's such that we pointed to the intelligence server such that it'll be grabbing those telemetry data from the intelligence server. And then the intelligent enterprise manager, will load the data from your stats repository into those tables I've just shown you based on the different categories. And then users can report on those tables. Now, where does that data warehouse reside? You get to choose as to where you want to set up your statistic repository. But you can set it up just like any other database. I think nowadays we use Kafka messaging services to be pointing and grabbing much of this telemetry data. And once the data has been populated or taken into the enterprise manager, populating those tables, then you have an administrator who goes into the project and essentially they start running reports and documents, similar to what we've just done there, assuming the first two steps had already been taken. Okay, so and then these reports or documents, they essentially running against the enterprise manager data warehouse, depending on what data warehouse it is. And usually that data is never cached. It's set up so it's always retrieving the latest data based on the report template from which it's drawing the data. Okay, so this is just a visual of the enterprise manager architecture in terms of the different components that are required and where the enterprise manager essentially resides. So I could say, since we say that it's collecting data, it's tapping into the intelligence server and essentially capturing every activity that's taking place in the intelligence server. So that'll be the main component of it. And then you'll have the different projects that will be obviously accessing data through the intelligence server. And then, as part of setting up the intelligence manager, you'll have set up the relevant data warehouses, or statistics warehouse or repository, as we call it, an enterprise manager data warehouse where you'll be sending those stats and logging the different information to them. And then you run your enterprise manager, which will be just like one of these projects, only it's reporting on this project, which makes it quite interesting. So the warehouse here, in terms of what type of table you will have, pretty much like any other data source. So lookup tables, fact tables, but this time around we're also talking about statistics table, log files. Okay, and then you have your reports that will be running against those lookup tables and fact tables for your enterprise manager. Okay, so as far as setting up the enterprise manager, as I said, it's similar to setting up any other database. So first, you're using what I call the connectivity wizard, set up a DSN, and then you use the configuration manager essentially to configure your enterprise manager project. So what you see is that this enterprise manager statistics, usually when you're creating the let's say you're creating a project, there's always, after creating the project, the next option is to also choose statistics and enterprise manager. So you could say this time around you're just specifically creating enterprise manager, and then you choose the project and just create it as enterprise manager project. Configure the I would call the enterprise manager data loader as to where it's grabbing the data from, and then where it's going to be writing the data to. Okay, and then you just configure what stats you want to be logging, and these can so given that you have different types of logs or stats, you have to choose the most efficient ones. Otherwise, it will be a lot of data that's being generated. And then just a question of scheduling your data load using command managers, so running scripts, automated script, in order to make sure that this your enterprise manager project tables are always and timely loaded. Okay, so as far as setting up, as you can see, it's using the configuration manager. So normally you would, at the moment you're creating the metadata object, the metadata project, using the configuration wizard. So normally just select the same selection, metadata, history list, and enterprise manager repositories. But what happens is after you've created your metadata, this time around your choice is not the metadata or the history list. You specifically want to create a stats and an enterprise manager repository. Okay, and then after that, this time around, again, back to the configuration wizard, you choose that specifically you want to configure an enterprise manager, enterprise manager project versus just the history list and the enterprise manager repository. Okay, once we've done that, I created, well, first, before we actually even create this or configure the enterprise manager, you would have created a data source name to where this enterprise manager will be residing in terms of the physical box. And then you create the enterprise manager, and then you create it as a project as well. And then the next thing is to set up your enterprise manager data loader service. So in this case, as to the service. So here the service using what we call service manager. Normally you use it for starting and stopping and restarting your intelligence server. But this time around in the service, we'll specify that we want to set up the data loader service. And then we just need to stop and restart it. And then now it will be sending data from the intelligence server to the data source name that you'd have specified. So this is where you need to specify what the DSN is for your enterprise manager GA or whatever the enterprise manager DSN that you'd created. Provide credentials and then connect the two. And now, as users run reports and documents in the enterprise manager, in the intelligence server, the relevant logs are being captured and then sent to the database that you've just specified. Okay, and then the last bit, well, not the last bit, but still around the in terms of setting up your intelligence enterprise manager. So as to logging data from the different projects on the each individual project, you can also set it up, or you have to set it up as well. Namely, that we want to collect statistics from this project and where they will be sent, which is essentially the enterprise manager database that we've specified, and then go ahead and actually do it. Okay, so what we'll do now, let's see. Okay, there's just some best practices around. Okay, so this is setting up, scheduling the loading of data uh, into your stats repository using Command Manager. So Command Manager will have pre-built script that will help you to schedule and then run this on a regular basis. It's just a question of specifying certain parameters using on the script itself. So the default script just says create data load, and then we need to specify the name of the environment. In this case, just the environment name, then the server, the project, in this case, Enterprise Miner. Could be the environment name as well. Uh, and then some of these you actually eliminate them. So in this case, there's a bit of duplicate. Unless you wanted to say this project and that project, then we can go ahead and grab them. So it could be multiple ones. And then the performance, the action that we want to perform, do action, update warehouse, repopulate. So you choose one of these, not all of them. And then you specify the date that it should start, how often, one of these options, and then also when it should stop. And then either you're enabling in terms of every, based on the time frame that you've selected, then you can choose every minute, every whatever you specify the number of time frames, and then enable it, provide the port, and then you hit run your script, and it'll be sending. Now it'll be sending or creating a data load to the project that you specified in the server that you have specified. Okay, some best practices around your enterprise manager. So the next few slides will go into details about best practices around installation and configuration, data loading, and then reporting itself. So these ones, I'll say you can also make reference to them within your notes. But this regards to the installation and the configuration, what we say here is that keep your enterprise manager on a separate server or a separate machine from your intelligence server, certainly in a production environment, in order to optimize the efficiency for both the enterprise manager and the intelligence server. Okay, now we say that your enterprise manager is a best practice. It should be on the same machine as your command manager, because essentially you'll be automating the scheduling of your enterprise manager in terms of the maintenance, the load and reload of data into the enterprise manager. You'll be using command manager, so hence on the same machine. In terms of the project, we say that it can use the same data, it can be on the same metadata as other projects, not a problem. And then we say that it can include one or more intelligent server environments, so statistics and enterprise manager, data warehouse, and then the data loader service. So here, the most important bit here is that your single data loader service is actually configured for your enterprise data warehouse. At least you should have one. You can have multiple ones, but then this means that you will expect what I call unexpected behavior and some data loss. So just keep it to one single data loader service. In terms of creating the stats and the enterprise manager repository. We say that keep that from your production data warehouse. So essentially, keep your intelligence server separate from your enterprise manager machine in order for the two to actually run successfully and efficiently. More on the best practice on installation and configuration, assigning user groups to use the relevant enterprise manager related privileges. So in this case, we want them to be, so you have what I call web viewers and enterprise manager administrators who will be able to configure your metadata on the enterprise manager. Now, we said that they come out of the box, the types of reports and documents that can be created, and hence your configuration manager, because essentially it's creating the default tables that will be populated once you connect to the relevant repository, but then you also need users to essentially manage this. Okay, assigning your admin user group to perform, or at least the privileges to administer enterprise manager, that goes without saying, but worth mentioning. Ensuring that when you're performing upgrades, that you keep your schema object intact without any modification. Otherwise, particularly if you modify your schema object during upgrades and the like, then it might be better to actually make copies versus modifying them. Or make copies and then modify the copies in performing upgrades. Okay, more on the best practices, which I said you can always make reference to. So given that your enterprise manager is the BI on your BI platform, so not just use it for what I call diagnostic purposes, but also use it to monitor itself. So in other words, keep it as a tool for monitoring your environment. Actually use it for feedback, as it were. When MicroStrategy comes up with hotfixes, by all means go ahead and use this. Service packs essentially for fixing bugs and issues, and some enhancements, of course. And then just, with as you'll see later on, and you can do this in your notes as well. There will be certain tables over time as they are no longer being used. They'll be prefixed with the delete to them. So the idea is that they are prefixed with delete because they will become obsolete. They will no longer be used by enterprise managers. So these can be deleted by your administrator. So that's on the configuration and installation side. Now, when it comes to data loading to the enterprise manager, it says here that perform the closed sessions actions is not necessarily required, but we do recommend it in order to run this particular task. Set up your scheduled data loads according to how long does the data load take, how current does the data need to be, and then you can schedule the data load accordingly. So if we do need real-time data, then just make sure that it's not taking longer than a few minutes. Otherwise, because it's grabbing data from your intelligence server, then essentially you'll be running, it was slowing down your intelligence server, and definitely your users will start complaining as to why the reports are taking longer because you are performing a data load. And that's why here they suggest doing it overnight rather, when there's minimum impact on the intelligence server. More on the data load, you repopulate tables. That's a task to synchronize your tables within your enterprise manager and the tables within the metadata. So by all means use that. Update object deletions, task to essentially delete project metadata that have been marked to be deleted by the enterprise manager, so they become obsolete, no longer needed. Now, if you do change names of projects within developer, the idea is to make sure that you also refresh the available projects within enterprise manager before you perform the next data load. Otherwise, those projects, the new projects, will be missed out. Okay, and then just making sure that you keep your intelligence server with the enterprise manager in sync as much as possible in order to ensure that the intelligence server is writing the correct stats into the relevant databases. Because what happens is they use the timestamp is absolutely critical in identifying the relevant tables and performing the relevant reports around those tables and activities around your intelligence server. So in terms of syncing the time, absolutely critical. Okay, now on the reporting side, i.e. the reports documents that are generated by Enterprise Manager. Some suggestions from MicroStrategy in terms of best practices. So essentially say that every time you perform a data load, essentially take some time to look at the reports that have been generated, just to make sure that it was a successful reload. Otherwise, then some of the metrics that you want to be reporting on, you may find you have a lot of null fields. Unfortunately, that will not make for good reports. So there's that idea to check those reports after every reload. Okay, another one with regards to the stats, once the process within your data load, essentially just to make sure that you we say that the scope of analysis, if it changes in terms of what amounts of stats and data that you are collecting, ensure that the number of reports within your Enterprise Manager match the new scope that you're now collecting. There are some interactive reports in terms of documents, as you'll see, with regards to peak usage, as I just showed you, where within your collection of reports, that some are best viewed in web enhanced report services document. So we do have them. So essentially, we say take some time to introduce yourself to reporting before actually running any reports, or at least familiarize yourself with the type of information that they capture. In terms of modifying reports directly, we suggest you make copies of those reports first, modify them, and then at least you still have the original copies of the reports that MicroStrategy has suggested or gave. Okay, and then the last two with regards to administration and users in the EM admin group, because we say that these are the users that will be managing your Enterprise Manager. So essentially we say that these should have the relevant permissions and privileges to run those reports. Now, if others are given the same privileges, just making sure that we keep track of who has been given what privileges within Enterprise Manager. Now, when you run a data reload, it says your data that's displayed with these hashes essentially means that the data cannot be displayed. So if you had a let's say a metric for your average report execution duration, and all you see are just these gibberish numbers, it simply means that maybe that report wasn't executed to completion within the time frame, or it got cancelled. So this could be an indicator for, hey, let's go in and figure out what happened there with regards to system issues, more than just, hey, we didn't actually get data, because this is actually time frame. Okay, so what we'll do, because this essentially completes chapter 8 around chapter 8 around Enterprise Manager. So we have quite a number of exercises on this one. So the first part I've pretty much done for you with regards to accessing Enterprise Manager, walking you through at least the attributes and metrics that it reports, and then some of the sample reports, which, as I said, some of these, particularly with regards to user activity. Now, as I said, in your case, some of these reports, as I said, most of them are prompted, if not all. the amount of data that your system will be generating will depend on, how long you've been using, well, not even how long you've been using the environment, to the extent that you've used the environment in the 2 days, well, a day and a half of training that you've actually taken. So now in this case, let's see. We haven't really generated an awful lot of reports. It's mainly just configuring stuff. If it was one of the what do we call this? The advanced reporting course, that definitely generates a lot of data, or the data mining class generates a lot of data. So it makes these exercises much more meaningful in terms of actually getting to see some of these reports. Okay. So nonetheless, I'll still give you time to do the exercises. So the exercises range from accessing your enterprise manager, creating a DSN, to create your statistics repository. So this is where you'll be using the configuration. Just remove this guy. So this is where you'll be invoking. Okay, so we'll be using Ming actually. What am I doing here? Configuration. So we'll be using Party and Xming to invoke the connectivity wizard in order to create a DSN, and then use the configuration wizard to create the statistics repository, and then configuring our data loader service using Service Manager. Create a database instance to connect to that statistics repository, and then configure a project that will grab the necessary login stats, and then just create a data load. So altogether, that will take us about 45 minutes, probably longer, given the number of pieces that you'll have to put together to get your enterprise manager going. So bear with me a second. I'll post this on your note. And then what we'll do is the next chapter. That's a good question. How to identify unused objects. I'll answer that in a second. The next chapter, chapter 9, is very brief. And then that one doesn't have any exercise. It's all about migrating to cloud. So that will take us about 15 minutes. But in any case, according to Frank's question, how do you identify unused objects? So you'll see, where is that? User activity resource. Under resource activity. So essentially, what happens? Let me use this one, the user activity analysis. So let's take this one. So you're essentially looking for a report that grabs your object. Sometimes you have to look for some of these, and essentially you'll be looking for objects that have 0 hits to them. Yeah, there you go. There's your operational analysis. This is around data load anyway. Resource allocation is the one I was looking for actually. So this one should have, as you can see, I barely come here. Oh, am I sharing my desktop? No. All right. My apologies. Okay, so there we go. So here I'm looking at the built-in reports within your enterprise manager. And specifically, I'm looking at this set of reports under resource utilization. So that should give us, let's take a look at this one. Activity analysis. I barely use these reports, by the way, so coming from education. So essentially, how you identify your unused object, you look for reports that will contain, so this one, let's see, change that to my environment. And let's change that to tutorial. Okay. So to answer your question, Frank, I'll have to search for the relevant report, but essentially it'll come up here, and based on the all the objects that you have created, you're looking for objects that have zero hit to them or zero usage to them. And then you can go ahead and modify that. Now, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, there is uh, actually a report that will give you, should give you, essentially give you the list of the least used objects. Again, I'll just have to search for it and find it. But once I do, I'll be more than happy to share that one with you. Okay, so while we do that, let's just pause here for a second and